answering what Pascal was saying in the previous presentation, although my talk could also be called this, role of crowd psychology, group psychology in safe events. The first thing to say, of course, is that people who work in your industry always use psychology in your work. You have to make assumptions about how people are going to behave in normal situations, in emergencies, in crises. You have to draw upon theories of how people behave in those kinds of events. And there are lots of theories out there, from pop psychology, from academic psychology, from your own experience. So what I'm offering is an evidence-based approach, an approach to group psychology, crowd psychology, and a crowd is just a form of a group, right? So that's why I use the terms interchangeably. That's based on the latest evidence. Can you hear me? Yeah. So what I'm going to do is talk through some fundamentals of group psychology as they relate to making your events, keeping your events safe. Then I'm going to show how to apply that psychology in practice, how you can use those ideas, focusing particularly on communication. And lastly, I'm going to talk through some new risks, in particular risks associated with artist-initiated show causes and how the group psychology principles can be used in that context. So I'm going to start off by explaining the basic group psychology, which is a group psychology of identities, by saying who I am. So I'm John, as you know, so that's me as an individual, but I'm also a member of a group. I'm a psychologist, and being a psychologist, being a member of that category, that group, is important to me. And it's true for you as well. You are individuals, but you're also a member of a group. And when I say group, I mean a social category. I mean you categorise others as in the same group as yourselves, which means that you include people you don't know personally, people you might not have met, strangers, also get included in that group. And the technical term for that, when people categorise each other as in the same group, is shared social identity. So social identity is the big idea in psychology for event safety. And the importance of it is when people do share social identity with each other, when they categorise each other as in the same group, a whole series of consequences follow. Consequences for behaviour, consequences for how they think about each other. So when people categorise each other as in the same group, they tend to trust each other more, which means they listen to each other and they believe what the other person says to them. When people are in the same group, they tend to influence each other more than if they're in different groups. You'll be more likely to adopt the same behaviour of somebody who's in your group versus somebody who's in a different group. And people will tend to share goals with each other when they're in the same group. And that means that they will try to align with each other, and they will assume that others are trying to align with them. When people are in the same group, when they categorise each other as in the same social category, they expect support from each other more. So if I get into trouble and you're in my group, I will expect you to care about that and to come to my rescue because I'm one of us with you. And that's one of the reasons why when people are in the same group as each other, they feel safer together. They feel stronger together. Now, that expectation that people will help you if they're in your group is actually truth, because people are more motivated to help others if they categorise them as in the same group as themselves. Now, if you put some of these together, that people expect support, they try to align their goals, they trust each other. You get a feature of collective behaviour, which is one of the most fascinating features, which is that people act as one in a spontaneous way. People can coordinate without even discussing it. They can behave as a single entity. So that's a few points about group. But another thing to say is we have multiple group memberships. I'm not just a psychologist. You're not just event safety professionals. You might be Arsenal fans, or you might be students as well, or you might be metal fans, and these might be group identities that matter to you too, in different contexts, and become important to you in different contexts. In addition, these group identities exist at different levels, and this is leading to the most important point for you and your relationship with your guests. My example is, so in my hometown there are two universities, Brighton and Sussex University. So at one level, the Brighton and Sussex students are two different groups. But when they compare themselves to non-students, they're the same group, students. Right? But both of those identities, student and the Sussex student, can be important to them in different contexts. So that means that on one level, you as professionals and your staff and your volunteers are one group, the people working at the festival, whereas the guests are another group. Of course you are separate groups, you've got different functions, different roles, of course. But at another level, you can consider yourselves, with your guests, to be part of the same group. You might consider yourself as part of the event community. Now, when that happens, of course, your guests don't see you as the same as them. You are professionals, but you become their professionals. You're not somebody doing something to them, but part of their group doing something for them. So just to show you that these things matter at your events, if you consider the kinds of behaviours from the public that you want for safe events, and in the case of a crisis or an emergency, how you want people to behave, I suggest these three are a minimum. So you want people in your audience, your crowd, to cooperate with each other, to behave in an orderly way. So if you've got a queue, you don't want them kind of pushing in, you want them to behave in an orderly way with each other. In relation to you, you want them to, if you say something to them, or you've got some signage or some instructions, you want them to listen to you, to trust what you say, to believe what you say, to comply with any instructions. And if there is an emergency, you want them to understand the seriousness of the crisis, remembering that in most emergencies the public underestimates what the danger is, they don't overestimate it. So you want them to understand the seriousness, but act with confidence and not too much anxiety. Now all of these things, all of these outcomes are much more likely when your crowd sees themselves as in the same group as you at some level, rather than seeing you as this out-group. So the question is, how do you achieve that? Because some events achieve it a lot better than others. Now before I answer that question directly, because I'm going to come to that at the end, I'm going to focus now on a specific problem and show you how some of this group psychology might apply. And when we think about risks associated with new trends, there's one thing, and it's the theme of this event, there's one thing that's in all the chat on LinkedIn, everyone's talking about it. I mean, a couple of years ago it was disruptive behaviour, and you've stopped talking about that now you're talking about this, right? It's Showstops, and of course, you know, I, like anyone, have been aware of this, particularly since Astroworld, but I was particularly inspired motivated to do something research-wise about it by an article by Morton and Pascal recently that described how since Astroworld there was a new trend towards artists being very proactive in different ways in initiating show pauses. And sometimes that wasn't always coordinated with staff and with the venue, and some of the consequences of that were not always positive and a bit unpredictable at times. So that was the background, and that's really interesting for the relationship that you're trying to build between yourselves as a group and with the audience. So we started a research project, and in fact it was led by my master's student Amy Whitworth, and some of you have kindly helped her in this project. This was her master's dissertation, and the good news is she is now going to do a PhD on this topic, on the social psychology of show pauses, artist-initiated show pauses. And we once again, we really welcome any of you who want to get involved in that, maybe speaking to her, maybe putting her in touch with your staff, and so on. That QR code, by the way, is the write-up of her paper, the first draft of her paper. You can have a look at that. So, so she started this work, and there were 2 studies in the project. But one of the ways that she kind of took the ideas that I've been talking about forward was she pointed out, and it sounds obvious, that actually it's not just the group of professionals and volunteers and staff and the audience, is it, right? It's three entities, if you like, because the artist is neither audience nor staff, but they're obviously really, really important, aren't they? They're obviously really influential, and many in the audience, as Chris was describing, can be heavily influenced by what the artist does. So we need to look at all 3 elements in that relationship. And indeed, when it goes well, conceptually, when it goes well, you've got all 3 within that circle as part of a community with the same understanding, the same goals, and so on. So that was the kind of starting point. So what she did, as I said, she did 2 studies. And the first study was just to get a sense of how people in the industry were experiencing these artist-initiated show pauses. That's the kind of the boundary of it. How they described them, and how they described what happened after different kinds of show pauses. So she spoke to 10 or 12 people, and although that's not a large number, this was like a pilot study, a first study, to just get a sense of the kind of experiences, the kind of show pauses that were out there, and what they were like. But I'm pleased with this sample, though, because she did speak to people from around the world, and across different genres as well. So there is a nice mixture in there, in this piece of evidence. So you won't be surprised to hear that show pauses and artist-initiated show pauses seem to take different forms, and in her analysis Amy classified this into 3 types. Now, we're not saying that there's only 3, of course not. This is just a function of the people we spoke to. I mean, there's probably many more, but this just gives a snapshot of some of the kinds of show pauses and some of the issues that arise from different kinds of show pauses. So the first one is the kind of ideal one, really, where artists and staff have the same understanding, they work together, and even if the artist is initiating it, the artist is working within the understanding shared by the staff, and the staff said, the ones that were interviewed said, yes, it went well because it reflected what we were all trying to do. It was efficient, it was communicated well, and the audience, there were no problems in the audience, right? So people accepted it, there was no unhappiness in the audience, it went well. Okay, good. Then there was another one where the artist repeatedly, and it was very much artist initiated, they repeatedly paused the show. I say pause, by the way. I know there's a debate around pause versus stop. When we started this work, we called it pause, and now everyone's saying stop, right? So we called it pause when we did the work, so I'll carry on using that term. And perhaps it's appropriate here because these were very brief stops and starts, right? Repeatedly stopping and starting. And this, according to the staff that Amy spoke to, this was, as the numbers of pauses increased, so the audience became increasingly disconnected from the audience. So that connection they might have had at the beginning where the artist says, look, we need to stop now because somebody's in danger of being hurt, that started to decline because it was like a false alarm. They're doing it repeatedly, and yeah, audience is becoming confused, irritated, frustrated, and not good for the relationship with the staff and the venue either. So that was one type, and then the third type is the one I want to spend a little bit more time on, which is the type, and I know you've all, because these appear in the press, so we're all aware of these. If you haven't had one in your work experience, you have seen one in the media because they do get attention. It's where the artist stops the show and criticises the staff as they do so. Perhaps stopping the show to say, I need to stop because the staff are treating one of the audience in an unfair way. That kind of thing. And this was the type that led to downstream consequences, at least in the experience of the people that AD spoke to. So you can see the first witness here, the first person we spoke to that described this, said, well, after it happened, after they did this, and they criticised the staff when they stopped the show, they noticed that audience members no longer listened to staff, right? They weren't willing to listen to staff when they tried to pass on information or instructions or safety. Afterwards, we only saw that they kept doing the thing they were told to do by the artist, and that they were breaking minor, not sure I'd say rules, but some of the culture that we're trying to establish as safety personnel there. There were other consequences too, because it was you might say it's quite a macho intervention by the artist, and it led to, in the experience of the female staff, aggressive behaviour that was quite angry towards female staff. They were very aggressive in their behaviour, so I went beside them and said, is there anything wrong here? And they told me, we want water. And one of the guys, he was my age, I guess, he took his finger right up to my face so I could step back, not to get his finger in my eyes. And again, I've never, in all my years at this festival, had an experience like that. And he used actually some of the same phrasing used by the artist. You are working for me, and I want you to give me water now, and you have to give me water. That's your job, and I'm paying to be here. It's my right to get water. So not a happy experience. So we started, based on the ideas I've been talking to you about, and these kinds of examples, we started to develop a couple of hypotheses. So if we are right that shared identity, not only amongst staff and audience, but also including the artist, improves safety, then when the artist acts in a way to reduce that connection or threaten that connection between staff and volunteers and the audience, then it can create risk by reducing the wish of the audience to cooperate with you. Right? That's the logic of it. And cooperating with you in your function as safety personnel thereby increases risk. So particularly when artists are critical of staff, that's the first hypothesis. But is it the case, because it really is a matter of how these things are perceived, right? So is it the case also that it's just any showstop where the audience perceive that the artist is acting in their interest, even if there isn't that criticism. Is that a risk? So that's what we looked at. And to test that idea, Amy did a survey. She sent the questionnaire to audience members. She found audience members that had experienced, seen, been at events where there was a Showstop, show pause since Astroworld, so the last 4 years. And she asked them to describe what kind of show pause it was. And these numbers, if you look at the first 2 rows, it's the same group as the second 2 rows, just dividing the numbers slightly differently. Okay? So most of them describe having seen artist-initiated show pauses. A minority describe having seen what they describe as coordinated show pauses. Remembering, this is the audience's perception. And then dividing that number again, a minority described events where they saw the artist criticising the staff. The majority did not. The artist did not criticise the staff. So moving on to the results. So for artist-initiated show pauses, for all of them, audience members viewed the staff as less on their side than in coordinated ones. So we're using the idea of being on their side as a kind of proxy measure of being in the same group, sharing identity. Because if you share identity, you should perceive your interest to be shared. So that's for all artist-initiated show pauses. Okay, so that's concerning, I would say. Criticism of staff by the artist just increased that quite massively, actually. You can see, here we are. The numbers, if you look at this second bottom row, you can see the big drop in the judgment by audience members that the staff were on their side when the artist was critical. But in each case, they're all seeing the artist as more on their side than the staff. The only situation where it's not significant is where it's coordinated. So that is quite a, so this is very preliminary, right? And so it does lead to some conclusions about what we might take from this. And, you know, I don't want to say that the artist is really important, okay? So the artist is right there at the front, making see what's going on, and so of course they have a role, you can't avoid that. But what this work is suggesting, and it's only preliminary, is that there are risks associated with these artist-initiated show pauses because of the way they might be perceived by audience members in reducing that connection that you have with the audience, and therefore reducing so some initial recommendations from this study. So obviously, artists shouldn't be criticising staff, right? That's an obvious recommendation to make. But more than that, here's a more practical recommendation that if the artist is perceived as kind of initiating the showstop, it's really important that they then reinforce through what they say that this is a joint decision, this reflects a common goal, this reflects a common purpose, not just in the interest of the audience, but this is what all of us involved in the show are doing, to project that collective decision. Okay, a third recommendation, actually this is a kind of rationale for why I run a CPD course for people like you, because I say, yes, I think it would be really helpful not just to know all the other stuff you know about crowd safety, but to know crowd psychology, know group psychology. But we could say the same thing to artists, right? Artists need to understand their influence, their power, the effect they might have on audiences, and how safety is a function of the balance, that three-way relationship. So some training, some education for artists is a third recommendation of this study. Got 50 minutes left, right? Okay. So finally, in this presentation, I'm going to broaden it out again, and as I said at the beginning, how can you enhance, how can you create shared social identity between yourselves and your guests, your audience. So now I'm going to go through some tips, some suggestions, evidence-based ideas that have been used in this context, in other contexts, and it all revolves around communication and language. And in the announcements that you make, which words do you use? How do you talk to the guests? How do you talk to the audience? Do you use an inclusive we and us to include them in this superordinate grouping or not? Because these things, it seems very small, but people notice when there's a use of an inclusive us or we. Then there are the nouns. How do you talk about this category that includes all of you? What are the words that you can use to describe that? So I already mentioned the event community, the festival community. It seems a nice one because it's a nice, attractive term, community, but there are others. I don't know whether Roskilde still does this, but it used to be the case that you described everybody who attends as a participant. Right? Is that still the case for Roskilde?
Yes.
Everyone is a participant?
Yes, it is.
Yep. That's lovely, isn't it? Because, again, it's an inclusive term that dissolves the difference without denying the difference, but including everybody. There's another one too, the festival family. And I like the family term because, of course, within a family there are different roles, aren't there? The mother, the father, the children, but they're still part of the family. Okay, let me ask you this. What is the biggest complaint that customers have about organisations? What really alienates customers from organisations?
Viewing.
Sorry, what?
Viewing.
Viewing?
Queuing.
Queuing. That wasn't what I was thinking of. I'm thinking of organisations in general, not just event safety. What do people moan about most? What do you see on Facebook people moaning? Management, well.
Voices.
Well, it's actually this. They didn't tell us what was going on. They didn't keep us informed. This happened, and they didn't tell us enough. That's what they moaned about. They told us to move without giving a reason. That is it. So, and informing them. Okay, so informing them gives them information which gives them efficacy, empowers them to act in the right way. But more than that, giving people information by giving reasons for what you're doing, it has another benefit because it shows that you care. It shows that you care enough because put yourself in their place and imagine how annoying it is when you're lacking that information about when the next update on the flight, the delayed flight is, that kind of thing. And all those things that they want to do, but you don't want them to do, explain why. And it takes time. We look at this same issue when we look at behavioural emergencies. And I work with the fire service, and they say, oh, well, if I have to explain to people why they're having to go through this decontamination procedure, we haven't got time for that. But I thought, well, actually, you have, because if you don't do it, if you don't explain why, then people will question you, they will argue with you, they will walk away, right? And that will take a lot more time than you taking a minute to explain why this is needed. So these things, in showing that you care, in showing that it's in their interest, that you have their interest at heart, you are showing that at some level you are in their group. And these other suggestions I have here, they're all kind of interpersonal. So the thing about the nouns you use and the we talk, you can use those in announcements, but this is for your staff, your volunteers, and it's social skills, because in many cases organisations assume that people, because they're human beings, they have social skills, right? But actually, people can learn social skills. People can get better at social skills. And one of the ways they do that is by reflecting upon them. So here are some. I've already said informing, but also engaging. Engaging means not just talking, but also listening. and be seen to be listening. Empathising, because sometimes, you know that events can be very emotional for people in good ways and bad ways. And to show that you understand, to reflect back that emotion, again, it creates connection. It shows that you have their interests at heart. At some level, you are the same as them. You're not somebody who doesn't care about their interests. And likewise, displaying respect. So all of these can serve to help create the common identity. So not just with you as an individual, with your staff member as an individual, but we hope with you as a category member. So staff at this festival care about us, care about the interest, care about the purpose of the event. One final point about identity is the content. Who are we exactly? What is this identity? So we talked about, the orange feeling, and that, invokes certain values and certain norms. And so, if you want to persuade people who buy into the identity that here's a behaviour that you don't want them to do, right, then you say, well, that behaviour is out of line with this identity that we're all committed to. It's out of line with the values of the identity that you believe in, right? Because if you simply say, don't do this behaviour, again, it's like an outside imposition, right? And they're not going to internalise what you're saying to them, which is what you want to achieve. Okay, so two takeaway points. So the basic point is that understanding groups and group psychology is a vital part of crowd safety. You do it anyway, and here's an evidence-based approach that allows you to do it in a more reflexive and conscious way. And on the specifics, I suggest that the same ideas can be used to help and improve show stops and show pauses, to build that relationship with artist and audience and your staff to enable more coordinated show pauses. And you've talked about how you need to do that work before the event so you're all on the same page. But there's also this point about how the artist frames, how the artist presents the show pause. So it's reinforced that you're all in the same boat together to avoid those problems after show pauses that I talked about. Thanks very much.